The morning sun painted the Colorado cliffs gold, but Aisha Johnson felt ice in her veins. Her youngest son Damien stood 3 feet away, his eyes cold as January steel. Melissa, his wife, clutched his arm like a vulture preparing to feast. Colonel Aisha Johnson had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan, but nothing prepared her for this moment. The family hiking trip had been Damien's idea, his first gesture of kindness in months. Now she understood why. Marcus, her husband of 35 years, stepped closer to the cliff's edge, trusting his son. The former sergeant had taught both boys to fish on these very trails. He had carried them on his shoulders when they were small and innocent. But innocence dies hard in some families, and greed kills it completely. Damien's hands pressed against his father's chest without warning or hesitation. Time fractured like broken glass. Marcus stumbled backward, his boots scraping against loose rock in morning frost. Aisha lunged forward, her mother's instinct overriding 60 years of careful military training. Damien's second shove sent her tumbling after her husband into the abyss below. The world spun in violent circles of blue sky and jagged stone. Wind screamed past her ears as gravity claimed its prize with ruthless precision. But Marcus Johnson was still a soldier, even at 62 years old. His voice cut through the chaos like a battlefield command that saved lives. "Play dead," he whispered, his words barely audible above the rushing air. Everything went silent, except for the sound of their bodies hitting rock. Aisha's shoulder cracked against granite, pain exploding through her entire nervous system. Blood filled her mouth, metallic and warm, as dust settled around them. Marcus lay 3 feet away, his face pressed against cold stone and earth. His chest rose and fell in shallow, controlled breaths that spoke of discipline. Aisha forced herself to remain motionless despite every instinct screaming for movement. Above them, footsteps crunched on gravel as Damien and Melissa approached the edge. "Are they breathing?" Melissa asked, her voice carrying excitement rather than concern. Damien leaned forward, studying the bodies below, like a hunter examining his kill. "No movement," he said, satisfaction dripping from every syllable like poisoned honey. "Good," Melissa replied, her laugh sharp enough to cut through mountain air. Aisha kept her eyes barely open, watching through blood-matted lashes above. Her son and daughter-in-law stood silhouetted against the morning sky like demons. "The house is worth $800,000, Melissa said, checking her phone screen. "Plus the land, the insurance money, and Dad's military pension benefits." Damien nodded, already calculating numbers in his head like a businessman closing deals. "Richard would have split everything with us, but now it's all ours." The mention of her eldest son's name sent ice through Aisha's broken heart. Richard had died 6 months ago, in what police called a hiking accident. But now she understood the truth with crystal clear, devastating certainty. Her youngest son was a killer, and she had been blind to it. "What about the grandchildren?" Melissa asked, applying lipstick as if discussing weekend plans. "Foster care," Damien replied without a trace of emotion or human warmth. "We're not raising his brats when we could be living in Miami." Aisha's blood boiled despite the cold mountain air surrounding her broken body. Those grandchildren were 8 and 10 years old, still grieving their father's death. Now they would be orphans because of their uncle's greed and heartless ambition. Marcus shifted slightly, his fingers finding hers among the rocks and debris. His touch was warm and steady, reminding her that they were alive. They were witnesses to murder, attempted murder, and a conspiracy of pure evil. "Should we go down and check?" Melissa asked, her voice betraying slight nervousness. "No need," Damien said, turning away from the cliff with casual indifference. 40-foot drop onto rocks, guarantees results, and I see no movement below." Their footsteps retreated slowly, crunching on gravel and dried autumn leaves. Car doors slammed in the distance, followed by an engine starting up. Dust and exhaust fumes drifted down from the parking area above them. Only when the sound faded completely did Marcus dare to move again. He sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through his ribs and back. "Aisha," he whispered, his voice cracked, but strong with military resolve. She opened her eyes fully, meeting his gaze with fury burning bright. "Did you hear what they said about Richard?" she asked, tasting blood. Marcus nodded grimly, understanding passing between them like a shared battlefield memory. Their eldest son hadn't died in an accident on these same mountain trails. Damien had killed his own brother for money, just like he tried tonight. "My phone," Aisha said, reaching carefully toward her jacket pocket with trembling fingers. The device had survived the fall, its screen cracked but still functional. She opened the voice recording app with hands shaking from cold and rage. "We need evidence," she said, her colonel's training kicking in despite physical pain. "Major Ramirez and Corporal Lee are still in Denver with the police department." Marcus smiled through his blood and bruises, remembering their old team fondly. Those men would believe their story and help them get justice for Richard. "Can you climb?" he asked, studying the rocky slope above their heads. Aisha tested her legs carefully, finding them bruised but not broken completely. "I survived Kandahar," she said, steel returning to her voice with each word. "I can survive this mountain and one treacherous son's betrayal." They began climbing slowly, using military tactics learned in hostile foreign terrain. Every handhold brought them closer to justice and revenge for their murdered son. Above them, the sun climbed higher, promising a new day of reckoning. Damien and Melissa thought they had won, but they had underestimated everything. They had underestimated a colonel's determination and a sergeant's survival skills. Most importantly, they had underestimated a mother's love for her children. As Aisha pulled herself over the cliff's edge, her bloodied lips parted. "This isn't over," she whispered to the morning wind with absolute certainty. 6 months earlier, Richard Johnson had been the golden son who never disappointed. At 35, he ran a successful accounting firm and coached Little League baseball. He called his parents every Sunday and visited twice a week with homemade dinner. Richard was the son who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and every important family milestone. His children adored him, and his wife Sarah had called him her soulmate. But Damien had always lived in his older brother's shadow like a poisonous plant. Where Richard succeeded, Damien failed with spectacular and increasingly bitter consequences. Richard earned his CPA while Damien dropped out of community college twice. Richard bought a house while Damien lived in their parents' basement until 28. Richard married a teacher while Damien found Melissa at a casino bar. The resentment festered in Damien's heart, like an infected wound for decades. Every family gathering became a comparison, every conversation a reminder of inadequacy. Aisha had tried to love both sons equally, but equality doesn't erase character. Richard brought joy to every room he entered with genuine warmth and laughter. Damien brought tension, complaints, and an endless hunger for money he hadn't earned. The night Richard died, rain pounded Denver like bullets against concrete and glass. His car was found wrapped around a tree on Lookout Mountain Road. The police report stated speed and weather conditions caused the single-vehicle accident. But Aisha knew her eldest son drove like an old lady on steroids. Richard had never gotten a speeding ticket in his entire adult life. He wouldn't drive fast in perfect weather, let alone during a thunderstorm. "Something's not right," she told Marcus as they stood in the morgue. Her colonel's instincts screamed danger, but grief clouded her investigative thinking process completely. Marcus held her as she sobbed over their son's broken body. "Who would hurt Richard?" he whispered, unable to imagine such pure evil. Everyone loved Richard Johnson, from his clients to his children's teachers. He volunteered at the animal shelter and donated blood every 8 weeks. The man didn't have an enemy in the world except for one person. But mothers don't want to believe their children are capable of murder. The funeral was held on a Tuesday morning in October sunshine. Richard's casket was surrounded by flowers from hundreds of mourning friends and colleagues. His children, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old James, clung to their mother Sarah. They didn't understand why Daddy wouldn't be coming home from his business trip. Aisha wore her dress uniform, honoring her son with military precision and pride. Marcus stood beside her, his own uniform pressed and his medals gleaming. They had buried fellow soldiers before, but never their own flesh and blood. Damien arrived 15 minutes late wearing a wrinkled suit and fake tears. He stumbled through his eulogy about loving his brother despite their differences. His voice cracked in all the wrong places like a bad actor. Melissa sat in the front row applying concealer to hide her calculating eyes. She kept checking her phone during the pastor's prayer for eternal peace. Aisha noticed how Melissa's gaze lingered on the insurance papers and estate documents. She noticed how Damien asked about the will before Richard was buried. But grief makes people blind to evil hiding in plain sight sometimes. After the service, Damien approached his parents with manufactured sympathy and fake concern. "I know this is hard," he said, his voice dripping false compassion. "But we need to talk about Richard's assets and financial responsibilities soon." Marcus wanted to punch his youngest son in his selfish, greedy face. "His body isn't even cold," Aisha said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Give us time to mourn before you start counting his money." Damien's mask slipped for just a second, revealing something dark and dangerous underneath. "I'm just trying to help the family during this difficult transition period." Melissa nodded beside him like a bobblehead doll programmed for greed and manipulation. "The children need stability," she added, with rehearsed concern for Richard's orphaned kids. But her eyes were calculating square footage and property values instead of mourning. Sarah, Richard's widow, watched this exchange with growing horror and disbelief completely. "Richard isn't even buried yet," she whispered, clutching her children closer protectively. "How can you talk about money when we're planning his funeral?" Damien shrugged as if discussing the weather rather than his brother's tragic death. "Life goes on," he said with chilling indifference to human suffering and loss. "Richard would want us to be practical about his estate and investments." That night, Aisha sat alone in her darkened living room staring upward. Richard's military portrait hung above the fireplace in dress uniform and proud smile. His eyes seemed to follow her as she paced the floor restlessly. The house felt empty without his Sunday visits and grandchildren's laughter echoing. No more phone calls about baseball games or work promotions or family news. No more homemade dinners delivered with bear hugs and terrible dad jokes. The silence was deafening after 35 years of Richard's presence and love. Marcus had gone to bed early, exhausted by grief and suspicious thoughts. But Aisha couldn't sleep with questions burning holes in her military mind. Why was Richard driving on Lookout Mountain during a thunderstorm that night? He had no business meetings scheduled and no friends in that area. The route made no sense for someone heading home from downtown Denver. Richard's phone records showed a call from Damien 30 minutes before the crash. When asked, Damien claimed he called about borrowing money for rent again. But Richard had refused to lend Damien money for the past 2 years. He was tired of enabling his brother's gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility completely. Sarah had mentioned Richard seemed upset after hanging up that final phone call. He grabbed his keys and left without explanation or his usual goodbye kiss. Something had driven Richard out into that storm, and Aisha suspected what. She stared at her son's portrait as rain began falling outside again. His smile seemed sadder now, as if he knew the truth about betrayal. "I should have listened to my gut," she whispered to his frozen image. Blood dripped from Aisha's forehead as she pulled herself over jagged rocks. Every muscle in her 60-year-old body screamed for mercy and immediate rest. But Colonel Aisha Johnson had never surrendered to pain during 2 tours overseas. She wouldn't start now with her husband bleeding beside these Colorado cliffs. Marcus groaned as he dragged his injured leg across sharp granite and loose gravel. His right ankle was twisted, at an unnatural angle that promised weeks of recovery. "Can you walk?" Aisha asked, examining his swollen joint with battlefield medic precision. "I can crawl to hell if it means catching that murdering son." His voice carried the same steel that once commanded respect in Afghan valleys. Even broken and bleeding, Marcus Johnson remained a soldier at his core. Aisha tore strips from her hiking shirt to create makeshift bandages and support. Her fingers worked with muscle memory from treating wounded comrades under fire. "We need shelter and a phone," she said, scanning the dense woods. The autumn air was dropping toward freezing as evening shadows lengthened dangerously. Without proper clothing or medical supplies, hypothermia would finish Damien's dirty work. Marcus pointed through the trees toward a faint glow of electric light. "Rest stop," he said, recognizing the pattern from years of road trips. They had stopped there countless times during family camping trips when boys. Back when Damien pretended to love his parents and Richard was alive. Before greed poisoned everything good in their fractured family's broken heart completely. Aisha helped Marcus to his feet, becoming his human crutch and support system. Each step sent fire through his damaged ankle and up his entire leg. But pain was temporary, while justice demanded permanent commitment and unwavering dedication. They stumbled through undergrowth that tore at their clothes and exposed skin. Branches caught Aisha's gray hair as she navigated by instinct and determination. The rest stop appeared after 20 minutes of agonizing progress through darkness. A single overhead light illuminated picnic tables and restroom facilities below them. No cars in the parking lot meant privacy for planning their next moves. Marcus collapsed onto a wooden bench while Aisha gathered dry wood and kindling. Her hands shook from cold and adrenaline as she built their campfire. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows across their battered faces and bodies. Warmth felt like salvation after the freezing mountain air and emotional trauma. "Tell me again what they said," Marcus whispered, staring into the flames. Aisha recounted every word from the cliff edge with photographic military recall. Damien's confession about Richard's murder rang in her ears like gunshots. Melissa's casual discussion of foster care for the grandchildren sparked maternal rage. The insurance money calculation delivered with the coldness of professional assassins everywhere. "We can't go to local police," Aisha said, her tactical mind engaging. "Damien will claim we're suffering from head injuries and traumatic brain damage. He'll say we're confused old people making wild accusations about grief." Marcus nodded grimly, understanding the legal maze ahead of them completely. Without evidence, their son would walk free while they looked crazy. Just like he walked free after Richard's suspicious car accident months ago. The system had failed Richard, but it wouldn't fail them twice. "We need backup," Aisha said, pulling her cracked phone from her jacket. The screen flickered, but showed 2 bars of signal strength in mountains. She scrolled through contacts until she found a familiar name from Afghanistan. Major Carlos Ramirez had served under her command during the worst battles. He now worked for Denver Police Department's Homicide Division with distinction. More importantly, he understood military loyalty and the bonds of shared combat. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar voice answered warmly. "Colonel Johnson," he said, recognizing her number despite the late hour completely. "Carlos," she replied, her voice cracking with emotion and overwhelming relief suddenly. "I need help, and I can't trust anyone else with this." She explained everything while Marcus listened from beside the crackling campfire. Damien's attempt on their lives, his confession about murdering Richard for money, the conspiracy with Melissa to steal property and abandon innocent grandchildren completely. Carlos listened without interruption, his training allowing complete focus and attention. "Jesus Christ," he whispered when she finished her devastating story completely. "Are you both safe right now, and do you need medical attention?" "We're alive," Aisha said, watching Marcus rewrap his injured ankle carefully. "But we need evidence that will stick in court and justice." You taught me never to leave a soldier behind, Colonel. His voice carried the same conviction that once saved her life overseas. This isn't just about justice for Richard anymore, Carlos. Aisha stared into the flames as tears finally came after hours. It's about protecting Emma and James from that monster wearing masks. Those children lost their father to Damien's greed and twisted jealousy completely. I won't let them lose their grandmother and grandfather too. Carlos was quiet for a moment, processing the military implications and strategy. What do you need from me and the department, Colonel? Surveillance equipment, undercover backup, and someone who believes the truth. Damien thinks we're dead, which gives us tactical advantage and surprise. We're going to let him bury himself with his own words. Marcus smiled through his pain as he watched his wife transform. The broken woman from the cliff was gone, replaced by Colonel Johnson. Her back straightened, despite bruises and cuts across her weathered brown skin. Her voice carried command authority that once led soldiers through hell. Carlos, I need Corporal Lee too, she continued with growing confidence. This is going to require the whole team working together again. You're not alone, Colonel, Carlos replied, with absolute certainty and conviction. We got your back, just like old times in the desert. The fire crackled as Aisha gripped the phone tighter in trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face, but steel returned to her voice completely. Then let's finish this war. The abandoned warehouse smelled like motor oil and forgotten dreams of justice. Aisha stood before a whiteboard covered in photos, timelines, and red connecting lines. Her military bearing had returned despite bandages covering cuts and deep bruises. Major Carlos Ramirez and Corporal Danny Lee flanked her like soldiers awaiting orders. These men had followed her through Afghanistan's deadliest valleys without question before. Now they were assembled for a different kind of war on American soil. Gentlemen, Aisha began, her voice carrying the authority of battlefield command again. We're going to catch a killer using the same tactics that saved lives. She pointed to Damien's photograph, taped to the center of the board. Target Alpha has committed murder and attempted murder for financial gain exclusively. He believes his parents are dead and the inheritance is secure. That arrogance will be his downfall and our tactical advantage moving forward. Marcus sat nearby, his injured leg propped on a folding chair uncomfortably. What's my role in this operation, Colonel? He asked with military formality. You're going to play dead for real this time, Sergeant. Aisha smiled grimly at the irony of their impossible situation currently. Damien thinks we're corpses rotting at the bottom of that cliff. We need him to stay confident while we gather evidence systematically. Ramirez stepped forward, his detective instincts already engaged and focused completely. What kind of evidence are we looking for specifically, Colonel? Confession, financial records, communication between him and his accomplice wife, Melissa. Anything that proves premeditation in Richard's murder and our attempted assassination. Lee nodded, understanding the legal requirements from his police academy training. We need audio, video, and documentation that will hold up in court. Defense attorneys will claim grief-induced paranoia if we don't have ironclad proof. Aisha traced her finger along the timeline showing Richard's death 6 months ago. Damien staged that car accident perfectly to look like weather and speed. But insurance companies require thorough investigation for large payouts like this one. He's been patient, but greed always makes criminals sloppy and overconfident eventually. She moved to a second photograph, showing Damien and Melissa at dinner. They've been celebrating our deaths for 3 days while planning their future. Social media posts about new cars, vacation plans, and real estate investments. Tomorrow, the insurance company releases Richard's life insurance payment to them. $2 million for a man who died too young and violently. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, hating the thought of profiting from Richard's murder. What happens when the insurance money hits their bank account, Aisha? They'll get sloppy and start spending like lottery winners do, typically. Melissa has been posting about Miami condos and designer handbags already. Ramirez pulled out surveillance equipment from a black duffel bag beside him. I've got micro cameras, directional microphones, and GPS tracking devices ready. Lee has access to financial monitoring through his connections at downtown banks. We can track every transaction, every conversation, every movement they make. Lee grinned with the enthusiasm of a hunter stalking dangerous prey. I love it when criminals think they're smarter than law enforcement. Damien's about to learn why underestimating military veterans is fatal. Aisha assigned roles with the precision of a battlefield commander coordinating attacks. Ramirez, you'll tail Damien to the bank when he cashes the check. Plant audio devices in his car while he's inside conducting business. Lee, you'll monitor Melissa's shopping spree and real estate appointments today. I want every conversation recorded and every transaction documented completely. Marcus and I will remain dead until we have everything we need. The plan unfolded over the next 48 hours like a precision military operation. Meanwhile, across town, Damien strutted into First National Bank like a conquering hero. He wore his best suit and practiced his grieving son expression. The insurance check felt heavy in his jacket pocket like stolen gold. $2 million for Richard's life, plus his parents' estate coming soon. Melissa waited in the parking lot, applying makeup and planning their celebration. After this, we'll never have to work another day again, she said. Her voice carried the excitement of a child on Christmas morning. Damien nodded, imagining himself as a wealthy man of leisure and luxury. No more groveling to his parents for rent money or loan assistance. No more living in Richard's shadow or listening to comparisons constantly. The teller processed his paperwork with professional sympathy for his multiple losses. I'm sorry for your family's recent tragedies, Mr. Johnson, she said softly. Damien manufactured tears and accepted her condolences with practiced grief completely. But hidden cameras captured every false expression and calculated gesture perfectly. Ramirez watched from across the street through high-powered binoculars and surveillance equipment. Target Alpha is inside conducting business as expected, he radioed quietly. Lee's voice crackled back through the secure communication channel they established. Target Beta is at the Mercedes dealership looking at convertibles currently. She's telling the salesman about her recent inheritance and newfound wealth. Later that evening, Damien and Melissa celebrated at Denver's most expensive restaurant. The audio devices planted in their car captured every incriminating word. To Richard, Damien raised his champagne glass with mock solemnity and fake respect. Thanks for dying at the perfect time, big brother. Melissa laughed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass and human decency. And to your parents for taking that scenic route off the cliff. Their timing was impeccable for our financial planning and future security. They discussed selling the family home and liquidating Marcus's military pension immediately. The grandchildren were mentioned only as obstacles to their comfortable retirement plans. Miles away, Aisha sat in a darkened surveillance van reviewing footage. Her laptop screen glowed with evidence of conspiracy, murder, and pure evil. Damien's confession played on repeat while she took detailed notes systematically. Marcus watched over her shoulder, his jaw clenched with righteous anger. We got them, he whispered, seeing justice, finally within their grasp. Aisha exhaled sharply as the weight of proof settled around them. Gotcha. The poison had been growing in Damien's heart since childhood, invisible and deadly. Aisha remembered the exact moment she first saw darkness behind his innocent eyes. He was 7 years old, standing over Richard's broken bicycle with a hammer. It fell down the stairs, he lied, tears streaming down his cherubic face. But bicycles don't fall upstairs, and hammers don't magically appear in children's hands. Even then, Richard had covered for his little brother with protective instincts. It's okay, Mama, 10-year-old Richard said, hugging his sobbing sibling close. Accidents happen, and I can fix it with Daddy's tools. Marcus knew better, whispering to Aisha later that night in bed. That boy's got poison in his veins, and it's growing stronger every day. But mothers want to believe their children can change and grow better. She thought love and patience could cure whatever darkness lived inside Damien. For 30 years, she made excuses for his failures and cruelty. Every missed job opportunity became someone else's fault in her protective narrative. Every broken relationship was blamed on the other person's inability to understand. Every arrest was a misunderstanding that money and lawyers could fix completely. But poison always finds a way to spread through the entire family system. Melissa had arrived like gasoline poured on Damien's smoldering resentment and bitterness. She was beautiful, calculating, and hungry for wealth she hadn't earned herself. At family dinners, she whispered encouragement for Damien's worst impulses and behaviors. "Your parents favor Richard," she said, planting seeds of deeper resentment constantly. "You deserve equal inheritance, not scraps from the golden son's table." The last family dinner had been 3 months before Richard's suspicious death. Aisha had cooked Richard's favorite meal to celebrate his latest business success. He had just landed a contract worth $500,000 annually. His accounting firm was expanding, and he talked about buying vacation homes. "I want to take the kids to Disney World this summer," he said. Emma and James cheered from their seats, already planning magical adventures ahead. Richard smiled at his children with pure paternal love and genuine joy. "Maybe Grandma and Grandpa can come with us for a family trip." Damien's fork clattered against his plate like a gunshot through dinner conversation. "Must be nice," he muttered, his voice thick with familiar jealousy and rage. "Some of us can't afford fancy vacations on our trust fund salaries." Richard's face fell as the familiar tension poisoned another family gathering completely. "Damien, I earned this contract through 15 years of hard work and sacrifice. Maybe if you finished college or stayed employed for more than months." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Melissa placed her hand on Damien's arm, stroking his ego and wounded pride. "Don't let him talk to you like that," she whispered loud enough. "You're just as smart and deserving as your precious brother always was." Damien stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor violently. "I'm tired of being treated like the family failure and disappointment. Richard gets everything while I get lectures about responsibility and hard work." He stormed toward the front door, Melissa following with calculated dramatic timing. "This family never changes," he shouted from the doorway with bitter finality. "But maybe it's time for some people to disappear permanently." The threat had seemed like typical Damien drama at the time then. Now Aisha understood it as a confession and declaration of murderous intent. 3 months later, Richard was dead in his twisted car wreckage. 6 months after that, she and Marcus were pushed off a cliff. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see evil hiding in plain sight. Now, as Aisha watched through the surveillance van's tinted windows carefully, heartbreak overwhelmed her. Emma and James played in Sarah's front yard, unaware of their father's truth. 10-year-old James pushed 8-year-old Emma on the tire swing Richard built. Their laughter echoed through the neighborhood like ghosts of happier times before. They still asked when Grandma and Grandpa would visit for Sunday dinner. Sarah had told them their grandparents were traveling and would return soon. But how do you tell children their uncle murdered their father? How do you explain that evil can wear familiar faces and smiles? "We have enough evidence," Marcus said, watching his wife's internal struggle. "Audio confessions, video surveillance, financial records proving premeditation and conspiracy completely. Ramirez says the DA will file charges within 24 hours maximum." Aisha nodded but couldn't look away from her innocent grandchildren playing. Emma was trying to teach their dog new tricks with patient determination. James was reading a book under the oak tree Richard planted years. They looked so much like their father at those same ages. The same kind eyes, the same gentle spirits, the same capacity for love. "What happens to them during the trial?" she asked quietly. "Court proceedings, media attention, learning the truth about their family's destruction completely." They'll discover their uncle killed their father for insurance, money, and greed. They'll learn their grandparents were nearly murdered by the same monster. Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand with calloused military fingers gently. "We fight, not for us," he said, his voice soft but determined. "For them. So they can grow up, knowing justice exists and evil doesn't win. So they never have to fear their own family again." Aisha felt tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as understanding dawned completely. This wasn't about revenge or personal satisfaction with punishing Damien appropriately. This was about protecting innocence from the poison that had destroyed everything. Emma looked up from her dog training and waved at cars passing. Her smile was pure sunshine, untainted by knowledge of family betrayal and murder. James called out to his mother about finishing homework before dinner tonight. His voice carried Richard's same responsibility and caring for others above himself. These children deserve to grow up free from toxic family dynamics completely. They deserve the truth, justice, and protection from evil wearing familiar faces. Aisha climbed out of the surveillance van and walked toward the house. Emma and James ran to her with squeals of joy and surprise. "Grandma!" they shouted, wrapping their arms around her injured but healing body. She held them close, breathing in their innocence and unconditional love deeply. "We missed you so much," Emma whispered against her grandmother's shoulder. "No more lies," Aisha whispered back, her voice breaking with promise. Detective Reynolds shuffled through the surveillance photos with bureaucratic indifference and professional skepticism. "This is circumstantial evidence at best, Mrs. Johnson," he said dismissively. Restaurant conversations could be interpreted as grief-induced, dark humor, not confessions. Financial records show inheritance patterns, but that's legal unless proven otherwise. Aisha's military composure cracked as frustration boiled through her disciplined exterior completely. 3 days of perfect surveillance, audio recordings, and photographic evidence meant nothing. The system was failing Richard again, just like it failed him months. "Detective, my son confessed to murder while toasting his brother's death. He celebrated pushing his parents off a cliff for insurance money. What more evidence do you need to arrest a cold-blooded killer?" Reynolds shrugged with the callousness of someone who had seen everything. "Defense attorneys will claim emotional distress affects memory and perception accuracy. Without physical evidence linking him to Richard's crash, it's hearsay. The cliff incident lacks witnesses besides yourselves, which creates credibility issues." Marcus leaned forward, his injured leg throbbing with pain and mounting anger. "So he gets away with murdering our son and attempting our deaths? Because the system protects killers better than it protects innocent victims?" Reynolds closed the file with administrative finality that felt like another death. "Bring me something concrete, and I'll consider filing preliminary charges. Until then, this is a family dispute with unfortunate financial motivations." Outside the police station, Ramirez and Lee flanked Aisha like protective bodyguards. "Colonel, we have other options beyond traditional law enforcement channels," Ramirez said. "Federal agencies might be interested in insurance fraud with this dollar amount." Lee nodded, understanding the implications of military justice versus civilian bureaucracy. "Or we could arrange an accidental encounter with some concrete evidence." But Aisha had already made her decision with the clarity of battlefield command. "I'm going to confront him directly and get the confession we need. Sometimes the only way to catch a snake is offering yourself. He thinks we're dead, which gives us one final element of surprise." Marcus grabbed her arm with protective intensity born from 35 years' marriage. "Aisha, he tried to kill us once and succeeded with Richard. Walking into his house is suicide, not strategy or tactical planning. We have the grandchildren to think about and protect from further trauma." She covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses from military service. "Which is exactly why I have to face him and end this." Emma and James deserve to know their father's killer faced justice. They deserve to grow up free from this family poison and toxicity. That evening, Aisha stood on Damien's front porch wearing her dress uniform. Every metal gleamed under the porch light like armor against his evil. Her earring contained a recording device smaller than a button battery. Ramirez and Lee waited in unmarked cars, positioned at strategic street corners. Local police were on standby despite their earlier reluctance and professional skepticism. Damien opened the door, expecting a delivery driver or neighborhood solicitor instead. His face went white, as if he had seen an actual ghost. "Hello, son," Aisha said, her voice carrying military authority and maternal disappointment. "Surprised to see your mother breathing and walking upright again?" Melissa appeared behind him, her mouth opening in shocked disbelief and terror. "This isn't possible," she whispered, clutching Damien's arm like a lifeline. "We watched you fall, and there was no movement afterward." Damien's shock transformed into cold calculation as his psychopathic mind adjusted. "So," he said, stepping aside with theatrical politeness and false hospitality, "you really thought you could stop me with your little resurrection trick?" The living room felt like a crime scene waiting to happen again. Family photos lined the mantel, including Richard's smiling face mocking the present. Damien gestured to the couch where Richard once sat during happier times. "Please, sit down and tell me how you survived that scenic fall. I'm genuinely curious about your escape and miraculous survival story completely." Aisha remained standing, her posture military straight despite internal rage and heartbreak. "You murdered your brother for money and tried to kill your parents. I want to hear you admit what kind of monster you've become." Damien laughed with the cruelty of someone who had abandoned human empathy. "Monster?" he repeated, savoring the word like expensive wine or blood. "I prefer pragmatist, mother. Someone who takes what life owes him. Richard had everything handed to him while I got lectures and disappointment." Melissa moved closer, her greed overriding any lingering fear of consequences. "Your precious Richard would have wasted that inheritance on charitable donations. We'll use it properly for luxury and pleasure instead of boring responsibility. The children will be better off in foster care than watching." The mention of Emma and James ignited nuclear fury in Aisha's heart. "Those babies lost their father because of your jealousy and greed. They worship the ground," Richard walked on and still asked questions. "How does it feel knowing you orphaned innocent children for money?" Damien's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the darkness underneath his false charm. "It feels like justice for 30 years of playing second fiddle." Richard's car accident was perfectly planned and executed without detection or suspicion. One phone call about mom needing help, and he rushed out. Straight into my trap on that mountain road during the storm. Melissa clapped her hands like applauding a theatrical performance of calculated murder. He was so predictable, always playing the hero and good son. The brake lines were easy to cut while he visited here. Physics and weather did the rest of our dirty work perfectly. Aisha felt the recording device capturing every incriminating word and confession. "And us?" she asked, keeping him talking despite her overwhelming rage. "The cliff was Melissa's idea," Damien said proudly, crediting his accomplice. "Make it look like grief-stricken parents jumped together in mutual suicide. Insurance pays double for accidental death, but nothing for intentional self-harm. We thought of everything except your military survival training and instincts." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Damien's eyes widened as understanding dawned with horrible clarity and finality. "You recorded this conversation, you manipulative old witch and snake. Just like your father taught you about battlefield intelligence and gathering evidence." Police burst through the front door with weapons drawn and ready. "Denver police! Nobody move or we will shoot to kill immediately." Damien thrashed against the handcuffs like a wild animal caught in traps. Melissa sobbed hysterically as reality crashed through her delusions of wealth and freedom. "This isn't fair," she screamed, mascara streaming down her cheeks. We deserve that money more than dead people and ungrateful children. Aisha stood tall among the chaos, trembling but completely unbroken by everything. Her son was finally going to face justice for Richard's cold-blooded murder. The grandchildren would grow up knowing their father's killer paid the price. Evil had worn her son's face, but truth had won this war. The Denver courthouse felt like a cathedral of justice with marble columns. Aisha straightened her dress uniform as she entered the packed courtroom. Every metal on her chest caught the morning light streaming through windows. Marcus walked beside her, his limp barely noticeable after weeks of healing. Behind them, Major Ramirez and Corporal Lee flanked their formation like honor guards. Sarah sat in the front row with Emma and James clinging to her. The children wore their Sunday best clothes to honor their father's memory. 10-year-old James held 8-year-old Emma's hand with protective big brother instincts. They didn't fully understand the proceedings but knew Daddy deserved justice today. District Attorney Patricia Martinez stood at the prosecution table with confident authority. Boxes of evidence surrounded her like weapons ready for legal warfare. Audio recordings, surveillance footage, financial documents, and witness testimony created an arsenal. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began with prosecutorial precision. Today you will hear how greed transformed family love into calculated murder. How two individuals destroyed lives for insurance, money, and inheritance wealth. Damien sat at the defendant's table wearing an ill-fitting suit and handcuffs. His usual arrogance had been replaced by the pallor of impending doom. Melissa sobbed quietly beside him, her designer dreams crumbling into legal reality. Public defender Robert Chen looked overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against them. His opening statement lasted 3 minutes and offered no real defense strategy. My clients made poor choices during a time of grief and confusion. The words sounded hollow in the face of premeditated murder and betrayal. Martinez played the restaurant audio recording first, filling the courtroom with evil. Damien's voice echoed through speakers as he toasted Richard's death gleefully. To Richard, thanks for dying at the perfect time, big brother. Melissa's laughter followed like nails on a chalkboard of human decency. The jury's faces showed disgust as the celebration of murder continued playing. Several jurors wiped away tears when the children were mentioned casually. Foster care will be perfect for those brats while we live. The recording captured every detail of their conspiracy with crystal clarity. Financial expert Dr. Rebecca Torres testified about the insurance fraud patterns clearly. The defendants accessed Richard's policy information weeks before his suspicious death. They researched claim procedures and payout timelines with methodical precision extensively. This demonstrates premeditation rather than opportunistic grief-induced decision-making completely. The break-line evidence was presented with forensic photography and expert analysis. Mechanic Joe Rodriguez explained how the cuts were deliberate and calculated precisely. These weren't wear marks or accident damage from normal vehicle operation. Someone used professional tools to create brake failure at high speeds. Major Carlos Ramirez took the witness stand in his dress uniform. His decorated chest commanded immediate respect from the jury and gallery. Colonel Johnson served with distinction in Afghanistan for 2 combat tours. Her integrity and truthfulness are beyond question in my professional military opinion. If she says her son attempted murder, I believe her completely. Corporal Danny Lee followed with testimony about the surveillance operation they conducted. We observed the defendants celebrating while the victims were presumed dead. Their behavior showed no grief, only excitement about newfound wealth and freedom. Melissa researched luxury cars, while Damien calculated inheritance values obsessively. The courtroom held its breath as Sarah approached the witness stand. Richard's widow wore black and carried a photograph of her husband. Richard was the most generous man I ever knew, she began. He would have given Damien money if asked, instead of stolen. But Damien wanted everything, not just help from his loving brother. Her voice broke as she described finding Richard's twisted car wreckage. The police said speed and weather caused the accident that night. But Richard drove like my grandmother, especially during storms and rain. He wouldn't speed if his life depended on it, which it did. 8-year-old Emma was called to testify about her father's character and love. The tiny girl approached the witness stand with trembling legs and courage. My daddy read me stories every night before bedtime prayers. He said family should protect each other, not hurt people we love. Uncle Damien hurt Daddy, and that makes me very sad inside. Her innocent words hit the jury like emotional sledgehammers to their hearts. Several jurors openly wept as Emma described missing her father's hugs. Damien's lawyer tried to object, but found no legal grounds for argument. The truth spoken by a child carried more weight than legal technicalities. Defense attorney Chen called character witnesses for Damien with desperate futility completely. Former co-workers described him as unreliable and prone to angry outbursts. Ex-girlfriends testified about his jealousy and violent tendencies during relationships historically. Even his own character witnesses painted him as unstable and dangerous. Melissa's defense crumbled when her shopping receipts were presented as evidence. Luxury purchases made while her in-laws were presumed dead showed callousness. Designer handbags bought with blood money demonstrated her complete lack of remorse. The prosecution's closing argument lasted 2 hours and demolished any remaining doubt. Damien Johnson killed his brother for money and tried murdering his parents. Melissa Johnson conspired in these crimes for financial gain and luxury lifestyle. They celebrated death while children grieved and grandparents nearly died. Justice demands life sentences for these calculated and heartless crimes against family. Chen's closing statement lasted 15 minutes and offered only sympathy pleas. Consider the defendants' troubled backgrounds and mental health struggles during sentencing. But troubled backgrounds don't excuse murder and attempted murder of family members. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning with their unanimous verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find Damien Johnson guilty. On the charge of attempted murder, we find Damien Johnson guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find Melissa Johnson. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as justice finally arrived for Richard. Damien's face crumpled as his life sentence was read with judicial authority. Melissa sobbed hysterically as her own life sentence sealed her fate permanently. "No!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the marble halls of justice. "This isn't fair. We deserve that money more than dead people." Even in defeat, her greed and callousness shone through like poison. Outside the courthouse, Aisha collapsed onto a wooden bench, completely drained. Adrenaline that had sustained her for months finally abandoned her exhausted body. Her hands trembled as the weight of justice settled around them. Marcus sat beside her and clasped her weathered hands with gentle strength. "We made it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion and relief. Richard's killers would never hurt another family member or innocent person again. The grandchildren could grow up knowing their father's death was avenged properly. Evil had been defeated by truth, teamwork, and a mother's love. 2 years later, the Johnson house echoed with children's laughter again. Emma's giggles drifted from the kitchen where she helped Aisha bake cookies. 10-year-old hands carefully measured flour while learning patience and precision together. "Grandma, tell me again about Daddy when he was little like me." Aisha smiled, her heart healing one story at a time through precious memories. "Your father was the kindest boy who ever walked this earth. He saved baby birds and shared his lunch with hungry classmates. Even as a child, Richard protected everyone he loved with fierce determination." James sat in the living room reading military history books enthusiastically. At 12 years old, he devoured stories of courage and honor. Marcus helped him understand tactics while teaching valuable life lessons about integrity. "Grandpa, why do some families hurt each other instead of protecting?" The question hung in the air like morning mist over peaceful waters. Marcus chose his words carefully, balancing truth with age, appropriate wisdom, and understanding. Some people let poison grow in their hearts until love dies. But we choose different paths, building strength through loyalty and teamwork. Your daddy chose love, just like you and Emma choose love. Richard's military portrait hung above the fireplace like a guardian angel watching. Fresh flowers sat beneath his photograph, replaced weekly by loving hands. The shrine honored his memory while teaching children about legacy and character. Sarah visited every Sunday for family dinners filled with stories and healing. She had found peace knowing Richard's killers would never hurt anyone again. The children still missed their father, but grief transformed into grateful remembrance. Aisha had legally adopted Emma and James after months of court proceedings. The paperwork was complicated, but love made everything worthwhile and meaningful completely. Marcus joked that he was too old for parenting, but his actions. He coached James's baseball team and attended every one of Emma's dance. The old soldier had found new purpose in protecting innocent lives. Major Ramirez visited every few weeks, bearing gifts and terrible dad jokes. Emma called him Uncle Carlos, while James begged for war stories. "Tell us about the time you and Grandma saved the village." Ramirez would laugh and launch into exaggerated tales of military heroism. His stories always emphasized teamwork, courage, and protecting those who couldn't. Corporal Lee brought his family for barbecues during summer evenings filled with. His children played with Emma and James, while adults shared memories. The military bond had expanded into chosen family built on trust. "You kids are lucky," Lee told them during one backyard gathering. "Your grandparents are the bravest soldiers I ever knew in combat." Emma beamed with pride while James practiced saluting like a real soldier. These children would grow up understanding honor, sacrifice, and true family bonds. The toxic legacy of Damien and Melissa had been broken permanently. Aisha taught Emma how to read maps during weekend camping trips. Navigation isn't just about finding your way through wilderness, sweetheart. It's about making good choices when life gets confusing and difficult. Emma nodded seriously, absorbing lessons disguised as fun outdoor adventures together. Marcus showed James how to tie knots and build fires safely. Self-reliance means taking care of yourself and others around you. Your daddy learned these same skills when he was your age. James practiced until his fingers could work rope like a professional sailor. The children learned resilience through games that built character and confidence. Aisha created treasure hunts that required problem-solving and teamwork to complete. "Life will challenge you," she explained while they searched for clues. "But you have each other, and family never gives up together." Emma and James learned to depend on each other instead of competing. Their bond grew stronger through shared adventures and mutual support always. Unlike their father and uncle, these siblings chose cooperation over rivalry. The poison that destroyed previous generations would die with their love. Evening walks became sacred time for storytelling and gentle life lessons. Aisha shared memories of Richard's kindness while pointing out constellations overhead. "Your daddy is watching from heaven, proud of how brave you've. He wants you to choose love over hate, always and forever." James asked thoughtful questions about good and evil in the world. Emma wanted to know why some people hurt their families intentionally. These conversations planted seeds of wisdom in fertile young minds ready. Sunday mornings meant church services, followed by visits to Richard's grave. Emma brought drawings while James brought flowers picked from their garden. They told their father about school achievements and weekend adventures happily. "We're keeping his memory alive through love and good choices, Aisha." The cemetery visits taught acceptance of death while celebrating life fully. Richard's influence continued shaping his children even after his physical absence. One golden evening, Aisha sat on the front porch watching sunset. Emma and James chased fireflies across the yard with boundless energy. Their laughter mixed with cricket songs and gentle evening breezes perfectly. Marcus joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and satisfied smiles. "Remember when this house felt like a tomb?" he asked quietly. Now it's alive again, with hope and innocent joy everywhere. Aisha nodded, feeling Richard's presence in his children's happy voices. The wind brushed her silver hair as peace settled around them. Emma ran up the porch steps with a jar of captured fireflies. "Look, Grandma, I caught stars for Daddy in heaven tonight." James followed with grass stains on his knees and pure happiness. "Can we camp in the backyard and tell ghost stories?" Aisha looked at their eager faces and felt overwhelming gratitude for. These children had survived unimaginable trauma, but remained innocent and loving. They chose trust over suspicion, kindness over cruelty, hope over despair. The family curse had been broken by conscious choices and protective love. As stars appeared overhead, Aisha whispered to Richard's memory softly. "Richard, we did it, son," she said to the evening sky. "The poison dies with them, and love grows in its place. Your children will know their worth and choose healthy relationships always. Evil tried to destroy our family, but good won this war." Marcus squeezed her hand as children's laughter echoed through their neighborhood. The Johnson family had been reborn through sacrifice, truth, and unwavering determination. Family can break you, but it can also save you completely. If you fight for the right one with everything you have.